I want you to think about something just for a second. Your doctor ran a test. They checked your circulation and they told you it was fine. And you went home and later that night, your feet were still burning. Or you woke up at 2 in the morning because a numbness wouldn't let you sleep. Or you stood up and just for a second, you were not completely sure where the floor was, and nobody explained why. That disconnect between what the test said and what you're actually feeling, that's not in your head. There's a real reason for it. And it's not that anything was done wrong, it's that you were given an answer to a different question. And I see this exact situation all the time, not occasionally, but constantly. Someone comes in and they tell me, they checked my circulation already. They said everything looks fine. And then almost immediately, they tell me, but they feel worse, more numb, more burning, more off balance. And you can see it. They're not confused about what they were told. They're confused because what they were told doesn't match what they're living. And I want to be very clear here. The test wasn't fake. The doctor was not wrong. The problem is what was actually being measured. Because when most people hear the term circulation, they think it answers one question. Is blood getting there? Yes or no? But nerves don't live in a yes or no system. There are two completely different things under the word circulation. And the test you had only measured one of them. What was measured? And what your nerves depend on are not the same thing. That's why this doesn't make sense. The part that gets tested most often is your large vessel circulation, your arteries, the big pipes. The question is simple. Can blood get from your heart down to your foot? Is there a blockage? Can we feel a pulse? And if that's normal, the test says your circulation is fine. And for that layer, that's true. But here's where this breaks. Your nerve does not live inside your artery. It lives downstream from it, at a level those tests don't measure. Your nerve lives at the level of the smallest vessels in your body, the capillaries. These are extremely small vessels where red blood cells move through almost single file. And this is where everything actually happens. Not just blood moving, but oxygen leaving the blood, nutrients entering the tissue, and the waste being removed. This is the environment your nerve lives in all day. So the real question is not, did blood get there? The real question is, what happened after it got there? Think of it like this. The large vessels are the highway. The capillaries are the neighborhood streets. The highway can be completely open, traffic moving perfectly, and still nothing is being delivered properly where people actually live. That's what this looks like. And when your test comes back normal, they check the highway. They did not check the neighborhood. So now you have someone with a strong pulse, warm feet, normal circulation testing, and they're still getting worse. Now that's not a contradiction. That's two different layers. Because blood getting there does not mean the nerve is getting what it needs. And to understand why, you need to know what's actually happening at the micro level. Now, let's go one level deeper, because this is where the conversation usually stops, and it shouldn't. The small vessels that supply your nerves are called the vasa nervorum. These are the vessels that actually feed the nerve itself, not the big arteries. the vessels that are directly responsible for keeping that nerve alive and functioning. And these vessels are extremely sensitive, not just to whether blood is present, but to the quality of that environment over time. There's also a structure lining those vessels that's almost never discussed, a thin protective layer along the inside of the vessel. It helps to regulate what moves in and out. It helps maintain stability. It affects how blood cells interact with the vessel wall. That layer is called the glycocalyx. And when that layer is intact, the system is stable. Delivery is efficient. Exchange works the way it is supposed to. But when that layer starts to break down, which happens under chronic metabolic stress, under inflammation, under oxidative load, the system doesn't fail all at once. It becomes less reliable. And that's the key. Not broken, not blocked, less reliable. Now let's talk about what actually causes that, because this is where people underestimate what's happening. One of the biggest drivers is metabolic volatility. Not just high blood sugar, fluctuating blood sugar, spikes and drops, inconsistency, because when blood chemistry is unstable, the vessels are constantly reacting to that instability. They're not sitting in a steady state. They're adapting over and over again. Over time, that affects how those vessels function. It affects their ability to regulate flow. So now you have a situation where blood is moving, but exchange is inefficient. And the nerve is living in that environment every single day. That's what creates the gap between circulation is fine and why am I getting worse? So when we say the environment becomes unstable, what does that actually mean? Let's break this into the real drivers. The first is metabolic instability. This is not about one lab value. It's about how consistent your system is. If your body is constantly shifting between fuel sources, glucose high, glucose low, insulin up, insulin down, that creates a chemically unstable environment. And the capillary system, it responds to that. The vessels become less predictable, less responsive, and less efficient. And the nerve, which depends on steady input, is now getting inconsistent support. Not zero support, but inconsistent support. And that matters over time. The second is inflammation. Inflammation doesn't just sit in the background. It directly affects the microcirculation. It changes how the vessels behave. It alters permeability. It affects the inner lining. That glycocalyx we talked about earlier, inflammation degrades it. And when that happens, the system becomes less controlled, less stable, not blocked, not shut down, but less precise. Third is microvascular inefficiency. Even with open arteries, the small vessels themselves can become less effective. They don't regulate flow as well. They don't respond to the demand the same way. So even though blood is arriving, the delivery system isn't matching what the nerve needs. The fourth is nerve capacity and demand. Your nerve is not passive. It requires energy constantly to maintain function, to conduct signals, to repair itself from normal daily wear. That repair process is ongoing. It doesn't wait. And that's where this starts to break first. When the environment becomes inconsistent, the nerve's ability to maintain and repair itself drops. Its reserve starts to shrink, its tolerance decreases, and now smaller problems start to show up as symptoms. So when you put all of this together, you don't get a dramatic failure, you get a system that's working, just not well enough. And that's what most neuropathy looks like. Let's talk about what this looks like over time, because this doesn't all just happen at once. It's a progression. And once you see it, you start to recognize it immediately. Stage 1 is a silent phase. This is early. The environment around the nerve is starting to change, but the nerve is still compensating. Symptoms are very subtle. Maybe occasional tingling. Maybe your feet fall asleep more easily. Maybe you notice it at the end of the day, but nothing consistent and nothing alarming. Most people, they just ignore it or explain it away. And if you tested circulation here, it will look fine because the highway is fine. Stage 2 is the compensation phase. Now the nerve can't fully compensate anymore. Symptoms become more consistent. Numbness is there more often. Tingling shows up regularly. But the bigger change is in function. You start to adjust how you move without even realizing it. You slow down on stairs. You reach out for support. You widen your stance slightly. You think you're just being careful, but what's actually happening is your body is adapting to reduced sensory input. And most people don't catch this. Stage 3 is the undeniable phase. Now it's clear. Symptoms are consistent. They affect sleep. They affect movement. Balance changes are noticeable. Maybe there's a fall, or even a near fall, the kind where you just caught yourself and thought, that was close, but you didn't tell anyone. And this is usually where people finally get serious about it. But by this point, the environment has been compromised for a long time. Not from one event, from accumulation. This isn't something that breaks overnight. It's something that slowly drifts until you finally feel it. And that's why it's missed so often, because people are waiting for something dramatic. But this isn't dramatic. It's gradual. And gradual problems don't trigger urgent responses. And by the time they do, you're not early anymore. Because what matters here is not one moment. It's the accumulation of that environment over time. One day of slightly impaired delivery, no problem. A year of it, different story. 5 years, now you feel it. And by the time you feel it clearly, it's been building for a while. That's why the tests don't match the experience. Because the test looks for a moment, and this is a process. So, when you're told your circulation is fine, what that really means is your large vessels are open. It does not mean your nerve environment is healthy. And that's the gap. Because the ankle brachial index, the most common circulation test you'll get, it compares blood pressure at your ankle to blood pressure in your arm. If that ratio is normal, large vessel flow is considered adequate. And for what it measures, it's a reasonable test. But it tells you nothing about the vasa nervorum, nothing about the glycocalyx integrity, nothing about whether oxygen is actually transferring at the capillary level, nothing about whether the environment your nerve lives in is stable or unstable. So the patient walks out thinking the full picture has been assessed. It hasn't. Half the picture has been assessed. So instead of asking, is my circulation good or bad? A better question, what is the quality of the environment where my nerves live? Because that's what determines what happens next. Not just whether blood is present, but whether that blood is doing its job effectively, consistently, over time. If you've been told everything looks fine, but you know something is changing, now you understand why. You're not crazy. You were just given part of the picture. And if nobody has looked at the level where your nerve actually lives, then you don't have the full answer yet. Most people don't get worse because nothing is being done. They get worse because the wrong thing is being measured. The test is looking at the highway, but the nerve lives in the neighborhood. And until someone looks at the neighborhood, you're working with an incomplete map. If you made it this far, you already know this isn't a surface level problem. Now, if this made something click for you, go ahead and get it looked at further, or share this with someone who's been dealing with neuropathy and can't get a clear answer, because this is the explanation most people never get.